She was the school's shining star, a cheerleader who could light up any room. No one imagined the person she'd fall for would be the one trusted to protect her future. No one saw the warning signs, until a frantic midnight call, a shattered alibi, and a cheerleader's dream world turned into a true crime puzzle no one could solve. Until now. Love true crime with real twists? Subscribe for the full story. Taylor Price had spent most of her 17 years learning how to perform calm under pressure. Stunts, exams, interviews, she could quiet her breath, lock her core, and land what others dropped. East Ridge High loved her for it. Teachers used her essays as models. The principal introduced her at pep rallies like a local legend, and strangers in the grocery line congratulated her mother on raising such a driven young lady. It felt good, until it felt like a trap. Coach Aaron Reed was the school's reliable constant. 32, a former college linebacker who taught U.S. history by day, ran conditioning drills by dusk, and signed volunteer forms for every fundraiser in between. He was the kind of coach who remembered birthdays, who carried spare hair ties for the girls, who talked scholarships like a second language. When the cheer sponsor went on maternity leave, the administration asked Reed to supervise the squad for a few months. He said yes because he always did. Their lanes crossed long before their lines blurred. He saw a captain who stayed late to stack mats and calm freshmen. She saw a mentor who noticed more than results. What began as feedback and rides back to the main building in the rain turned into late-night texts that sounded like care but felt like oxygen. "You okay?" he'd ask at 10:41 p.m. after a rough practice. "Proud of you," he'd add after a win, followed by a specific detail only someone who really watched would know. "You recovered that dip like a pro." That's leadership. Boundaries behaved like tape on a gym floor, visible, then scuffed, then gone. No one would say exactly when they crossed them. Taylor might place it in his office, walls lined with old playbooks, when he asked if she was eating and she broke into tears she hadn't let anyone else see. Reed might place it on a Tuesday, on the walkway between the gym and the faculty lot, when she handed him back a borrowed ankle brace and let her fingers linger, just long enough for both of them to understand the danger. What they agreed on, later, was that neither of them planned it, which is how most disasters begin. East Ridge was a place where secrets wore Letterman jackets. Rumors didn't need evidence, only momentum. The first hint arrived as an anonymous sticky note in Taylor's locker. "Careful, people talk." The second was a photo, two silhouettes in the parking lot at 11:18 p.m., grainy and distant, faces indistinguishable, but the proportions and posture familiar to anyone who wanted them to be. The photo made the junior varsity group chat before first bell. By lunch, it was in 3 basketball group texts. By last period, a substitute teacher asked a colleague if that coach should really be staying so late. Taylor's mother, Denise, had the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes. She worked double shifts at the diner, kept a magnet calendar of everyone's schedules on the fridge, and used the word college like a spell against the life she'd had to settle for. She found a motel receipt wedged in Taylor's backpack, one of those generic printouts with a local address and a total. The name on the reservation wasn't Taylor's, but the last 4 digits on file matched her Apple Pay. Denise folded the paper in half, then in half again, and slid it back where it came from. That night, she asked questions gently, then firmly. When Taylor lied, Denise set rules. Phone in the kitchen by 10, no late practices without a chaperone, no rides with any coach, period. Taylor nodded until her neck ached. Reed adjusted. He moved their messages off school platforms. He sent fewer words, more emojis, then fewer of those too. He suggested breaks, and then broke them. "I can wait," he wrote once. "I'm not going anywhere." The sentence landed heavy. Promise, threat, lifeline, all in 5 words. Winter came dark and fast. Ice clung to road edges, and the parking lot became a mirror for a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or snow. Practice schedules bent around storms. Team morale dipped under exams. On a Friday night game, Taylor hit every stunt with a smile dialed to 10. Reed clapped from the sideline, then told her to go home before the roads glazed. She nodded obediently, circled the block, and parked behind the gym. He was already there, heater on, radio low. They said 10 minutes, which became an hour. They talked futures like conspiracy, transfer options, campus dorms, Coastlines no one from East Ridge ever saw. They kissed like a solution rather than a choice. At 12:06 a.m., Denise called. Then again. On the fourth ring, Taylor answered. Her mother's voice was flat with effort. "Come home," she said. "Now." Taylor did. Denise placed the crumpled receipt on the table between them and turned her phone to show the silhouettes. She didn't yell. "You've worked too hard to build a door out of this town," she said. "Don't hand the key to someone who has to stay." The next week was a pendulum. Taylor blocked Reed, then unblocked him. He wrote, "I'll talk to administration. I'll step back." He wrote, "We'll be careful." He wrote, "Or we stop." She wrote, "We can't keep pretending this is nothing." Every message created an echo they couldn't stop hearing. Then came the icy Tuesday. School dismissed at noon. The superintendent's robocall warned of hazardous conditions. Denise messaged, "Go straight home. Salt the steps." Taylor salted. She stared at the porch light. She grabbed her bag and drove to school. To get the bow I forgot, talking out loud like that would convince the part of her that still knew right from wrong. The campus was an empty set. The gym light a square of gold in a blue-gray world. Reed's office lamp glowed. "You shouldn't be here," he said, standing when she stepped in. It sounded like a line he meant. "I know," she said, meaning she would always be here if he asked. They didn't touch. They said the words adults tell teenagers they want to hear. Responsibility, future, consequences. Reed worried out loud about his job, about his wife who had begun asking too many how late questions. Taylor worried about her captaincy, her letter of recommendation, the way her own reflection looked older lately. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it had any right to. Footsteps sounded in the hall, deliberate, not rushed. The doorknob turned. It held. He always locked it when the door closed. A shadow crossed the narrow window and then disappeared. Reed exhaled too loudly, smiled too fast. "Custodian," he said, and both of them knew the custodian had left at 5. That night at 10:57 p.m., a neighbor on County Road 8 reported a car idling near the tree line by the old softball fields. At 11:22, a student posted a cryptic Instagram story. Black screen, white text, "Y'all not ready." At 11:59, Denise called Taylor and got voicemail. She tried again and again. At 12:14 a.m., a 911 call came from a number traced to a prepaid phone. "Hi," panic breathing, and a phrase the dispatcher replayed later to make sure she'd heard it right. "It's the coach. It's the coach." By 12:28, squad cars lit up the service road that runs behind the gym, blue strobes refracting off ice. Officers found a sedan skewed sideways near the loading dock, passenger door ajar, the ground scarred with slips and scuffles. Inside the car, a varsity jacket, a cheer bow crumpled under the seat, a smear of blood on the console, not yet frozen. 20 yards away, behind a dumpster cut out of the wind, they found a body. The first story anyone heard was wrong. Someone said Taylor had run away. Someone said Reed had quit. Someone said the wife was involved. Someone else said it was the quarterback. The only true thing was that by sunrise, the school would tape off the gym. The principal would schedule a press conference with phrases like "deeply saddened" and "cooperating fully." And East Ridge would become a town you recognize from headlines you wish you hadn't clicked. Reed's alibi cracked before breakfast. He told officers he'd left campus before 9. Security cameras showed his truck at the back lot at 9:37. A digital forensics tech pulled chat fragments from a cloud backup Reed thought he disabled. A parent forward shared the silhouette photo to a cousin who forwarded it to a deputy. Denise sat in a family room that smelled like disinfectant and said, with a steadiness she borrowed from every double shift she'd ever worked, "Ask me anything." By mid-morning, the cheer squad gathered in the counselor's office, shaking and wordless. A freshman said she'd seen Taylor and Reed laughing after practice last week. A senior said she'd warned Taylor, and Taylor said she knew what she was doing. The counselor said trauma has a way of making every conversation feel like a confession. The DA arrived at noon with a suit too sharp for a snow day and a voice made for podiums. He said words like persons of interest and ongoing. Reporters misquoted him in a rush to be first. Instagram filled with black hearts and fly-high posts from people who'd never spoken Taylor outside hallways. What happened between 10:57 and 12:28 would become a map the investigators rebuilt inch by inch. Tire tracks photographed, Footprints measured, phone pings triangulated, text timestamps aligned against security footage with a clock 2 minutes slow. The story they would tell in court, months from now, when the ice had long melted and the field was green again, would be clean. The truth that lived in the hearts of those who had loved and feared and chosen and failed would never be. By late afternoon, as plows carved gray lanes through white streets and the school's marquee blinked, counselors available, Denise stood at her window watching salt pebbles melt tiny circles of ice on her porch. She held a bow Taylor hadn't worn since freshman year and tried to remember the last uncomplicated day. Across town, in a room where the thermostat never seemed to work, Reed stared at his scabbed knuckles and rehearsed a sentence he would say 100 times. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. No one ever does. That is not a defense. It is the opening line of too many tragedies that begin under stadium lights and end under police tape, where love is mistaken for rescue, secrets look like plans, and a midnight call turns a private sin into a public crime. Under the glow of the counseling office's fluorescent lights, East Ridge tried to pretend it still knew how to function. The morning after the icy night, the hallways felt hollow, lockers shut softer, laughter dropped an octave, and every whispered rumor seemed to skitter along the tile. The gym doors were taped off, the marquee out front blinking counselors available like a lifeline that couldn't hold anyone's weight. Taylor's photo sat framed on the principal's desk beside a stack of statements waiting for signatures. In the parking lot, tire tracks had frozen into hard ridges, a map of panic preserved in ice. Denise kept her hands busy so she wouldn't scream. She washed the same 3 dishes twice, folded and refolded towels that didn't need folding, then collected the bows scattered in Taylor's room and laid them out like a timeline. Freshman year glitter, sophomore stripes, last season's navy satin. She refused the officer's offer to rest a bit and instead asked for forms, names, next steps. When she spoke to detectives, she didn't cry. She listed dates, warned about half-truths, and told them, quietly, my daughter was 17 and afraid of disappointing everyone. At the station, Reed looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks and had aged years in a night. He wore the same school hoodie from the day before, dried salt crusted at the hem. He repeated his version of the evening, voice measured. He closed the gym, he checked doors, he went home. When confronted with the camera timestamps, he swallowed and said he'd forgotten about a phone call. When asked about his messages with Taylor, his fingers tightened into fists, then flattened again on the table. You understand how this looks, the detective said, not unkindly. I understand I should have kept my distance, Reed answered. I didn't hurt her. Where were you between 10 and midnight? Driving. Thinking. He stopped. The truth was a tangle that sounded worse in every direction. Back at school, the cheer squad huddled in the counselor's room with paper cups of water they didn't drink. A freshman picked the edge of her styrofoam until it shredded. A senior spoke first, voice shaking. She loved this team. She loved us. Don't let them say she was just some girl who made a mistake. Heads nodded, eyes red. Someone whispered that Taylor had talked about leaving, not the team, but the town. Someone else said they'd seen a pickup truck near the service road last night. White, or maybe silver, the kind every other man in town drove. By noon, the town's 2 constants, church and football, found themselves on the same side of a prayer they didn't know how to say. The pastor posted a statement asking for compassion. The athletic director asked for privacy, and neither word slowed the feed of black square posts, fly-high captions, or speculative comments that braided sympathy with blame. Denise unlocked Taylor's phone with a code she had once promised not to use. Inside, the pieces were there, but just out of order. Archived messages, timestamps that skipped, a notes app with a single unfinished sentence. If we don't stop now, it will stop us. She handed the phone to the detective and kept the bow clutched in her fist. The DA met with investigators in a closed conference room and drew a rectangle on a legal pad labeled window 1057 to 1228. Inside it, arrows, parking lot sighting, neighbor's call, prepaid 911. He circled Reed's name, then underlined it once and wrote 3 other names in the margins. Witnesses with grudges, boys with motives, a spouse with questions. Reed's wife, Jenna, sat on their couch with a blanket around her shoulders, phone face down on the coffee table. Reporters had knocked, then waited, then left business cards they hoped she'd call when the shock calcified into anger. She stared at the photos on the mantle, summer hikes, a Christmas sweater party, a picture from their wedding where Reed's jaw looked softer, and tried to inhale without choking. When a detective asked if she knew about the affair, her throat moved like she might say no. She said, "I knew something was wrong. I didn't know this." As afternoon light thinned, Denise returned to the station for another round of questions. She spoke about structure, how Taylor kept a planner, how she wrote checklists with little boxes she filled in with satisfying precision. She told them Taylor had been afraid the night before, not of a person, but of the web tightening. She wanted to stop, Denise said, but stopping means admitting you started. The school district sent an email at 3:17 p.m. "We are deeply saddened. We will cooperate. We will review policies. Students are encouraged to seek support." The words were right. The timing felt late. The halls felt empty. In the locker room, a custodian quietly collected tape balls and water bottles. He paused at the end of the bench where Taylor always sat and found a small spiral notebook wedged behind a vent. Inside, practice sequences, doodles of formations, and a quote in block letters. "When you're in the air, commit." He handed it to the principal without opening to the back page, where a list of dates had been started and then scribbled out. Deputies canvassed County Road 8 and the strip of woods behind the loading dock, marking shoe prints with little yellow tints before the sun could soften them. Measurements were taken, stride length, tread patterns. One set overlapped another near a patch of ice where the thin crust had shattered, evidence of a slip or a struggle. By early evening, the timeline tightened. The neighbor's call placed a car idling at 10:57. A camera at the bus depot, 2 blocks over, caught a truck at 11:12 with fog windows and a broken left brake light. Reed's truck had both brake lights intact. Another camera, grainy and badly angled, captured 2 figures moving quickly along the gym's back wall at 11:19, one taller, one in a varsity jacket. Reed listened to the list and shook his head like he could dislodge the parts that glued themselves to him. He kept returning to the same line, a plea that drove the detective to rub his temples. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The detective finally said, "Meaning doesn't erase movement." A JV cheerleader's mother, furious and grief-struck, posted a long message on Facebook naming Reed outright. Comments stacked fast, some in defense of him, some damning, many weaponizing scripture, a few begging for everyone to log off. By nightfall, the school board scheduled an emergency meeting. Lawyers reviewed contracts. The superintendent practiced saying words like interim and investigation in front of his bathroom mirror. And then, as if the town had been holding its breath all day and finally exhaled, a new detail surfaced. A gas station clerk on the highway called the tip line. A man with a cut on his knuckles bought bandages and a bottle of water around midnight, hands shaking as he paid. He wore a school hoodie. "Lots of folks do," the clerk said, but he kept looking at his hands like they didn't belong to him. The detective compared notes. Denise watched the sky shift from the pale blue of a January afternoon to the color of old bruises. Reed's wife turned off her porch light and sat in the dark. In the squad room, someone turned down a radio playing a game recap that pivoted mid-sentence to breaking news. Before midnight, a judge signed a warrant. Squad cars rolled out again, tires crunching the salt as they left thin white wakes on the road. The house they approached was quiet, no lights on, a single pair of shoes on the mat by the door. They knocked. They waited. Reed opened it. He looked smaller in the doorway, like the frame had stolen his outline. He lifted his hands before they asked, palms out, knuckles raw. "Tell me she's okay," he said, voice breaking on the last word, as if saying it created the possibility. The detective swallowed. "We need you to come with us." Behind everything, the tape, the timelines, the statements and posts in grainy frames, ran the human truth that would outlast the headlines. A girl who wanted a door out of town and picked the wrong key. A man who mistook need for love and secrecy for safety. A mother who had been right to worry. A community that didn't know where to put its anger without burning itself. And somewhere, under the ice that would melt by spring, lay the pieces everyone would try to fit into a clean picture. But clean pictures are for yearbooks. This one would always have smudges. Under the courthouse's cold fluorescent lights, East Ridge held its breath. By morning, a warrant had brought Coach Reed in, knuckles raw. eyes hollow. "Tell me she's okay," he'd asked at the door. No one answered. Inside an interview room, a recorder clicked on. Reed's voice was steady at first, then frayed. He admitted seeing Taylor at school that night. "We talked. She left. I locked up, but every timestamp pushed back. Cameras, a neighbor's call, a prepaid 911. His alibi bent until it sounded like a script even he no longer believed. Across town, Denise sat at her kitchen table, phone face down, Taylor's bows coiled like question marks. Detectives had taken the cell, the planner, even the ankle tape from her gym bag. She answered every call with the same tight calm. "If you loved her, be kind. Don't guess out loud." When the DA's office asked for another statement, she went without sleeping, repeating the line that kept her spine straight. "My daughter was 17. She deserved adults." At school, the counselor's room became a refuge. The cheer squad circled up, hands linked. A freshman sobbed that she'd seen the coach and Taylor laughing in the hallway last week. A senior whispered that Taylor had been packing a plan. Community college first, then transfer, far away. The counselor wrote 3 words on a sticky note: "Grief needs boundaries," and slid boxes of tissues toward them like offerings. Outside, the gym door stayed taped, the marquee blinking "Counselors available" in a snow haze. Investigators tightened the window. Tire tracks, shoe prints, timestamp drift. A gas station clerk called in a tip. A man in a school hoodie, knuckles bleeding, buying bandages near midnight. He kept staring at his hands. The clerk said, like they'd done something without him. The details slipped into the timeline like a blade. Reed's wife, Jenna, sat in their dim living room, wedding photos facing a wall. When a detective asked what she knew, she chose the cleanest truth. "I knew something was wrong. I didn't know this." She handed over a box of receipts, a login to their family cloud, and the spare key he'd stopped using without explanation. By afternoon, the rumor machine screamed. A Facebook post named Reed outright. Comments split into camps. "Defend him, destroy him, please stop." The athletic director read a prepared statement and looked like he might faint. The school board announced an emergency session. Lawyers drafted interim. Students posted black hearts. The quarterback reposted and turned off comments. The town's 2 megaphones, the church bulletin and the Friday night booth, both asked for patience neither knew how to enforce. In the squad room, a detective laid out photos. The back lot, the loading dock, the bow under the passenger seat, the smear on the console. He slid forward a printed chat fragment recovered from the cloud. "If we don't stop now, it will stop us," and watched Reed stare at the line like it might rearrange. "We talked about stopping," Reed said. "We tried." He rubbed his eyes. "I didn't touch her. Not last night." The detective didn't nod, didn't argue. He pointed to the clock, 10:57 to 12:28. Evening fell early, muting the town in blue. Denise stood by the window, streetlights haloing the salt on her steps. She thought of every time she told Taylor to be careful and wished she'd said something sharper, or softer, or sooner. She texted the squad moms. "We feed them here at 6, and put on a pot of chili with hands that wouldn't stop shaking." At 6:30, the girls arrived in hoodies and red eyes. They ate in quiet, then shared memories. Taylor's laugh when someone botched an 8 count. Her way of taking blame to protect a freshman. The pep talk that made a lost game feel survivable. Denise listened with a half smile that hurt. "Hold on to what she gave you that wasn't a secret," she said. "That part is yours." By 9, a deputy returned from the lab with prelim notes on the blood smear. Type match pending, latent prints partial. The DA paced, weighing arrest versus person of interest, justice versus haste. "The town is already on fire," a detective said. "Better we light it with facts." A nod, a phone call, the slow machinery of a charge beginning to turn. And somewhere outside the headlines, a frozen roadside thawing in the tiniest beads, a quiet locker room still smelling of chalk, lingered the pieces that refused to fit cleanly. 2 sets of footprints overlapping, then veering apart. A coach who says he left, a girl who never made it home, a mother who refuses to let her become only a cautionary tale. The story was narrowing to a point, the way winter narrows light. A single brutal night mapped in minutes and inches. But the human map, love mistaken for rescue, power disguised as care, a town's need to blame what it doesn't understand. remained wide, messy, and painfully alive. Tomorrow would bring charges or another twist. Tonight brought only waiting, and the quiet knowledge that, in East Ridge, nothing would ever be routine again. Under the glare of TV lights and courthouse whispers, East Ridge braced for the break. By morning, the DA moved from person of interest to charges, improper relationship with a student, obstruction, and pending homicide based on emerging forensics. Reed stood in cuffs, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor as reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. Inside interrogation, the timeline hardened. A partial print on the passenger console, blood type consistent with Taylor, and security footage catching Reed's truck circling the back lot twice. The prepaid 911 call, panicked male, was traced to a kiosk off Highway 6. The clerk's description matched Reed's hoodie, the cut knuckles, the shaking hands. "You're building a picture," Reed said hoarsely, not the truth. The detective slid forward one last photo, 2 sets of footprints converging on ice, then a single staggered trail away. Denise refused to let her daughter be reduced to evidence. She organized a vigil on the field, candles cupped in mittened hands, the cheer squad in oversized coats, bows pinned low. She spoke into the mic with a voice that didn't waver. My daughter was more than a headline. She was brave, and she was failed by adults. The crowd murmured amen. A freshman sobbed into a teammate's shoulder. Reed's wife, Jenna, arrived at the station with a lawyer and a box of old emails. Timeline anchors that undercut his "we barely spoke" claim. She didn't look at him. "I will not carry your lies," she said quietly, then signed the consent forms and left without the ring. That night, a break no one expected. Dashcam footage from a snowplow passing the service road at 11:21 p.m. caught a white pickup idling lights off near the loading dock. Not Reed's. The plate was obscured by ice, but a dented tailgate and a mismatched rear wheel stood out. Detectives traded looks. Jealous ex, angry teammate, a parent with an agenda. The clean narrative bent without breaking. The DA didn't flinch. "Multiple can be guilty," he said. "Power, secrecy, opportunity. He still stands." An arrest warrant for Reed on homicide followed, with a parallel bolo for the white pickup. East Ridge split clean down a fault line. Those who believed the simple story and those who smelled a second thread. At home, Denise packed Taylor's room slowly, fingers pausing on the notebook where her daughter had written, "When you're in the air, commit." She placed it in a box labeled keep. In the kitchen, the squad ate soup in silence until one girl whispered, "If we quit, the worst thing wins." Denise nodded. "Then don't." Reed spent the night in county, replaying minutes like beads on a broken strand. He heard the 12:14 call in his head, over and over. It's the coach. It's the coach. He told himself he'd left before anything happened. Told himself the prints were transfer, the blood from trying to help, the phone call a trap. He told himself a version he could survive. Just before dawn, deputies found the white pickup 2 towns over behind a closed body shop. Tailgate dented, rear wheel mismatched, ice melting into muddy ruts. On the passenger floor, a single Navy bow. By sunrise, East Ridge woke to sirens again. Not an ending, but a widening. What looked simple the night before now had teeth. The case had a coach in cuffs, a town in pieces, and a second shadow moving through the cold. The story wasn't closing, it was cracking open. And beneath the crack, the same truth held. Love disguised as rescue, power masked as care, and a girl who should have made it home. The gym was quiet when the verdict came, announced first by a push alert, then by whispers moving faster than wind. Coach Reed indicted for homicide, with investigators pursuing a second suspect tied to the white pickup. East Ridge exhaled like it had been holding its breath for weeks. Relief for some, rage for others, and for Denise, only the ache of what no courtroom could return. In County Orange, Reed looked smaller. His lawyer spoke about reasonable doubt, contaminated timelines, the dashcam truck, the bow found miles away. Reed stared at his raw knuckles and repeated what he'd told himself 100 nights. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Meaning had no jurisdiction here. Detectives kept working. The body shop owner folded under questions and gave a name, someone with a grudge, a history of fights, a reason to watch the service road and wait. Search warrants multiplied. A cast of shoe prints matched a pair recovered from a cousin's garage. The story, once a straight line to the coach, forked into a darker path. Jealousy, leverage, a late-night confrontation that crashed into the wrong secret at the worst moment. The DA didn't blink. Cases can hold two truths at once. Denise curated what remained. She boxed trophies but kept the notes Taylor wrote to teammates, the practice notebook that read when you're in the air, "Commit," the old bow with the frayed edge. She spoke at the vigil again, not about punishment, but about adults and lines and what protection should look like. "My daughter deserved a world that loved her without taking," she said. People cried for Taylor, and maybe for themselves. The squad returned to the mat. Not for pep rallies, those fell hollow, but for each other. They learned a quieter routine, stunts simple and clean. On the day they performed it in an empty gym, they left the last 8 count open, arms lifted to a beat that wasn't there, a space Taylor would have filled. It wasn't closure, it was a place to breathe. Jenna filed the paperwork, changed the locks, and met with detectives one last time. She handed over a final thread, an email Reed had drafted and never sent. Subject line: resignation. The date was the day before the storm. Spring crept in like an apology. Ice retreated from a service road, revealing tire scars that would fade to dust. The marquee stopped blinking counselors available and returned to go Falcons, and that felt wrong and right at once. East Ridge learned to live with a split-screen memory, a coach in cuffs, a second suspect in headlines, and a girl whose name people whispered softer now, as if loudness might push her further away. In court, the narrative stretched to hold everything. The power imbalance and the secret meetings, the dashcam pickup and the Navy bow, the prepaid 911 call, and the fingerprints no one could wish away. The jury would be asked to decide where guilt began and how far it traveled. The town would be left to decide what it wanted to forgive and what it needed to change. On a warm afternoon, Denise sat on the bleachers with a paper cup of concession stand lemonade and watched the JV team run drills. A freshman missed a catch, laughed, tried again. The sound was ordinary, miraculously ordinary. Denise closed her eyes, let sunlight rest on her face, and whispered Taylor's name like a promise, not a prayer. This wasn't a neat ending. Reed faced trial. The white pickup's driver faced charges of his own. Policies changed, trainings were scheduled. Doors that used to close didn't anymore. Grief didn't leave, it learned the house. And in that house, on a shelf above the kitchen table, Denise kept one thing within reach. A Navy bow, frayed at the edge, proof of a life that was more than a headline and a night that won't be allowed to repeat. East Ridge moved forward the way towns do. One game, one church bulletin, one dinner at a time, carrying a story with sharp edges that everyone learned to hold carefully. Not closure, not yet, but a line drawn where there hadn't been one, and a promise that the next Taylor who shines under lights will be seen, protected, and brought safely home.